So I am in here today to share a story with you, but first I wanted to share a story about a legend, an old Hindu legend. Some of you may have heard it, I don't know, but if you have, just enjoy it too. Enjoy the reminder. So there was once a time when all men were gods. Everybody living on earth were gods. They had the divinity, they knew what their divinity was. But during that time, during that time, they began to realize that with that power, they could abuse it. And they did. It was greatly abused. So the chief god, Brahma, said, I need to take this away from them. Their divinity needs to go away. So what happened was that they met with all the gods, the council of gods, and he said, let's take the divinity out of each man, woman, child, everyone. And the gods said, but where should we put it? What we should do with it? So one god said, I think maybe we should bury it deep in the earth. And that's what they did. And it was buried deep into the earth. And then they stopped and they said, we can't do that. Because man will what? They will dig and dig and dig. They said, well, maybe we should put it at the bottom of the ocean because nobody will ever find it there. And one god said, you know what? There's some pretty good swimmers out there. And they're going to swim and dive and figure it out. They're going to find it. So one god said, well, then we should put it at the highest mountain. And then the other god said, well, they're climbing already. So they're going to climb and climb and climb. So then Brahma got the idea. He said, I know what to do. I'll put it in a place they'll never think to look, inside of themselves. So they did. And since that time, people have been digging, they've been swimming, and they've been climbing the highest mountains, and they have never understood that all they needed to know is that they had it all along. It was there all along. And that's part of the story from this morning. It's a simple truth, right? Oftentimes on this journey that I've had with unity and before unity, it's been about finding the truth. When I get to the truth of things, it's oftentimes so simple, isn't it? So that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. My journey with unity began in 1989, and I'd like to say it was because I was looking diligently for a church every week. But I lived in Hawaii at the time. And I had a friend who loved to windsurf, and so did I, so we used to go on Sundays. So she said to me one Sunday, she said, look, let's stop at this place I found. I think you're going to like it on the way. So on my way to windsurfing, we stopped at Unity of Honolulu. And when I walked in, I knew I'd found home. I was home. And I guess it's 30 years ago now. Went fast. And that journey has grown and grown since then. I found the unconditional love, the acceptance, and the simple truth in being in unity. But in 2009, my journey continued as, what he said earlier, and I went down and founded Unity Radiant Light. We're about to celebrate our 10th anniversary. And we found out 3 weeks ago our building was sold, so we're now moving into a new building. Everything worked out in perfect and divine order, a bigger one, better one for us. And as we continue that journey, my spiritual journey continues. That's why we're called Unity Truth Students, is because we grow together. That's the importance of this, is that we're all growing together. We never stop learning. And as all of you that are following Reverend Tony's progress knows that we never stop learning, 43 classes later, and as we continue the progression in Unity Church. But the journey I'm going to talk about today began on May 20th, 2012. It was a really profound day. And it was a Sunday at Unity Radiant Light. And I decided to do the first white stone ceremony. Do you do the white stone ceremony here? It's a wonderful ceremony. The stones come from Jerusalem. And we do meditation. And when we go into meditation with the white stone, a word or a name may appear. And the word that appeared to me in my meditation that day was imagination, which was really curious. I'm like, okay, this is something new. And I wrote down imagination. And I took my stone home that night, and it was that evening that I began having a series of dreams that went on for months. And in these dreams, these people were in my dreams that I had never met. They were very tall. And they started telling me stories about the origins of the planet and where things had come from. And at first I was just kind of writing things down and then finding everything I could to read. And God bless my husband, because he just went with it. And sometimes I would wake up with blueprints of gadgets that don't exist, and I'd be drawing them. And it occurred to me a few months into this that I needed to write a book. And then what happened from there, when I started looking at what I was learning in my dreams, I recognized the 12 powers. We're really there and coming out vividly with each lesson that I learned. And in these 12 powers, imagination is right in the middle, we notice. But in these 12 powers, as I was reading other things outside, I started to understand that these are matching up with many of the indigenous beliefs on the planet. And I started really correlating this and learning so much during this time. I was locked up a lot in all my spare time because I was just learning everything I possibly could. And I recognized the indigenous beliefs back to Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of Unity. Everything crossed over. So at that point, I decided to add a little imagination. I love the power of imagination. And started writing a book series, Amanda Fisher and the Source Crystals. And the Source Crystals are actually the 12 powers. And it's a middle grade series, and it's based on these kids who are heroes, and they find out they're guardians of these source crystals. And really, the same thing is happening from the Hindu tradition. There's a lot of abuse going on the planet and below it with these nasty creatures that I created. And they have to activate each of the powers, each of the source crystals, to save the planet and take it into a higher vibration. So it's a wild story. As I was studying the indigenous, I realized each of the powers really relate to the indigenous beliefs. So from there, I realized that we had to go, and I know my husband just hated this, we had to go to Hawaii first. For 3 weeks, we went to the Hawaii. I'll just put those down there. We went there, and as we did that, every time we've journeyed, and I'll talk about some of the journeys I've had and that are coming, it's amazing. The perfect kahunas or shamans, I don't have to really look too much ahead of time because they show up. And when they show up, I know that's when I'm supposed to go. It's actually, everything works in perfect and divine order. So we went to the Hawaiian Islands. Anybody who's been to Maui knows the road to Hana. My husband bravely drove it. He's always taken that. He calls it driving Miss Crazy. But he's taken me for all of our journeys. He drives. And one summer I had almost, 72 weddings. He drove me to all of them. And, we have a lot of fun together. So he's wonderful. He's a saint. So we went to Maui. We drove down that. We went to Oahu. And then we went to the Big Island for most of the time. And the Big Island's the one on the bottom there. And what we started to find out was amazing. Sat with the kahunas, learned their traditions, and just listened a lot. We started seeing these truths show up. But something happened in this too, and I started hearing stories. And they kept talking about the fact that their belief system goes back. In some cases, they go back 40,000 years. And they all started talking about the same thing in the other places we've been to, which I'll get to. But they started telling us about the star beings that came and really our where we talk about that hidden link, that missing link, that they were there. Well, they were talking about the Pleiades, the seven sisters. I have to tell you that when they were talking about the Pleiades, I heard one word: aliens. And I went, oh, I said, oh my gosh, they're talking about aliens. They're talking about people coming here and helping me. And this is an indigenous culture. Fortunately, I had seen the movie, so I was ready. So we were really ready for it. So once I got over and started really listening to what they were saying, and they were talking about these benevolent beings that have been here all along, and everything's based on love. Unconditional love. One of the things that amazed me is that some of the channelings that they had said come through the Pleiades, they were talking about the Pleiades principles, and it was remarkable how close they are to our Unity 5 principles. I was astounded. The Fillmores really got it right. They knew. I mean, they had a sense of where we come from, who we are. And I always believed it, but it confirmed it even more. I found with unity, and Huna is a set of beliefs. There are 7 Huna principles. And unity, law of mind action, thoughts settled in mind, produce after their own kind, is the same as the 3rd law of Huna. Energy flows, Makia. Energy flows where attention goes. And these similarities kept showing up as we've traveled. So we went from, there's the golf course my husband played on Big Island. Beautiful. But when I told him that the next book, because we were doing The Power of Faith and Strength in Hawaii, and then we were going to have to go to Alaska, or Nicole, there was going to be an ice castle in the next one. I said, honey, we're going to the ice castle, ice hotel in Quebec. And he just kind of looked at me and went, really? But he was a good sport, and that's him sitting in the ice hotel there. Everything's made out of ice. And even our bed was. Everything, we had a suite, it had a fireplace, but it put all the warmth outside, so our room was actually like 22 degrees. But as I associated the powers with it, we've had these experiences that have been wonderful. And the things I found from the Inuits to in Australia, the Uluru. Now, we haven't been there yet. We're going to go next year. A shaman showed up who's agreed to spend a week with me in Australia next year, so we're going to go. But this is something that's it's in Uluru, which is that big mountain there. That's a very sacred mountain for the indigenous on the planet. And there's a cave. That's a cave drawing. And this was, they say it's about 20,000 years old. And they're talking about the Pleiadians there. That's a picture of one of the astronauts. It's the Nazca lines in Peru. Have you ever wondered where they came from? These are the only thing you can see from the air, these huge lines, and they're really old. They show a picture of the ancient man, but then there's one that's probably 20,000 years older, which they call in Peru, the indigenous call it the ancient astronaut. Is there a theme here? To the Moai of Easter Island. You know, it's funny, everybody had these theories about Easter Island, but it wasn't until fairly recently that people actually started to ask the indigenous there of what they mean and where they came from. And as they've come to find out, it's a place for fertility, but also to keep the divinity going. Has anybody heard of the Hopi Prophecy Rock? We had that a lot. We heard about that a lot in 2012, right? Because everybody was talking about this rock that there was 2 paths. The top path shows man throughout thousands of years, and it shows that it be getting really rough, and then that you see that line at the end, it just stopped. So that's what we heard about, because everybody's like, wow, the planet's going to end because the line stops. But what they didn't realize is that there was the lower line. And if you look at that lower line, that shows our divinity. And do you see in a place where all of a sudden the lines meet, it comes down and meets the other? And according to the Hopis, and in those traditions, that we began to understand our divinity at that time. And now we're on the second path, and it goes all the way around the rock. There is no ending. So if anybody was worried, it's good. It's all good. The one thing I found everywhere I went, same thing, in every single belief system that they had, is the first unity principle. One presence, one power. God is all good and active in everything, everywhere. On this planet, and most other religions too. That is the belief system among the indigenous. Isn't that remarkable? Simple truth, right? So we started to ask some questions, and Dan and I are followers of the author Greg Braden. He's written many wonderful books. If you haven't read him, he's great. We go to a lot of his conferences. We're allowed to. I haven't been told that I have to stay a certain amount of feet away from him yet. I'm going to see him very soon in Mexico at the end of the year. And there we're going to go into the pyramids and study those. But he's wonderful. He was a scientist in the Navy. And the more that he studied the science, the more that he found God. He said he couldn't get there without that. And he spent decades now studying with some of the indigenous and some of the most remote Tibetan temples, and just everywhere where the belief systems are. So we saw him, and he was talking about one of the studies that he did. And he said he decided to put this to test because he found a lot of the same things among the indigenous. And he said, what we need to know is let's take the oldest known piece of book on the planet, and let's look into that, and let's go ahead. And he said there's a way you can do it when you work with scholars, that you can attribute the alphabet to it, because the oldest known book is the Sefer Yetzirah. And it's Jewish, but it has geometric symbols. So it took them a long time, and they studied it, and they broke it down into the alphabet, and you're never going to believe what they found. There was one line over and over again. God eternal within the body. Wow. We're seeing it with the indigenous. We're seeing it now with the oldest book on the planet. It's remarkable. So Greg, being a scientist, said, you know what? I want to know what science says because I find God in science. So he did, and as he moved into this area, he said, what can I take with science? What can I take and assign an alphabet to see what it says? And do you know can anybody guess what he did? Chart of elements. And it took him a long time. And he worked with a lot of scientists over this to make sure that they had it right, and they were able to attribute alphabet. And guess what he found? One line and every single element, one message. God eternal within the body. Really goes back to Brahma, right? Let's put it where nobody can see it. Because the truth has been in front of us all along. And it's so profound. And wherever they test it, and he's written, books about the Bible, and they find the same thing. Now, as a Unity Truth student, you know this, right? I do too, but I'd love to see it proven. I love to see scholars look at it. I love to see scientists look at it, because it's there, it's in front of us. And it really goes, the simple truth is John 10:3, right? I and the Father are one. One simple line. I and the Father are one. It means so much. It describes us. And it is the simple truth. So really, once we understand that, we're really looking at the second unity principle, is the divine nature of consciousness. I am naturally good because of God's divinity is in me, but not only just in me, in everyone else. Therefore, we are all naturally good, right? It's there. And sometimes people argue with me about that and say, but you haven't met, my mother-in-law or whatever. I say, well, that's okay. Look for the divinity and deal with her. And sometimes I think we're more awake. Some people could be more asleep. We all have that same divinity. It's all there. It's that potential. And what do we know in unity is when we believe that and we join together with it, it impacts mass consciousness. The vibration begins to rise, and it impacts people. And it's really, once we understand this and we live with this simple truth, everything changes. If 5 years ago someone had said to me, oh, by the way, your church building's sold, when can you leave? Like I learned 3 weeks ago, I would have freaked out. I would have. I did a little bit, maybe, yeah, a little. But and then I said, no, everything's going to be in perfect and divine order. And within it was about 72 hours, I had another place call me and say, I heard you guys need to move and we've got a space. And I went and it was perfect, and I get to have office hours. We're in a little tiny building in Providence. It's 2.5 miles away in North Providence, and I'll be there now more. We'll have more. We can do a lot more as a group, and the place is twice the size, and it's just wonderful. And you know what? I knew that we needed to do that. My goal was over the next year that we should probably move. I just got a little nudge. So June 30th is our first service there, and everything's just happened perfectly. It's happened easily because we understand these principles, and they're in action in our lives all the time. It's up to us and how we're going to respond to this. But when we know this truth, and we see this truth is everywhere on the planet, this belief system, it's amazing. And Myrtle Fillmore really said it well. She said, look for the Christ in others. So when we can do that, we'll change everything. That impossible word becomes I am possible. And understanding these truth principles is so important. I don't know if any of you realized or noticed that I took my shoes off at the beginning of service today. And I did it for a simple reason. And it's not because Unity of Cape Cod is a sacred building, even though I believe it is. We know it is. I did it because of each one of you. I am looking at the divine in every single one of you. And I look at you and I understand that truth and that magnificence. And that changes everything. You're here. You're living your truth. We're expressing this truth. You're expressing it as a community. And therefore, I am on sacred ground because of you. And I so appreciate that. I really do. So at the end of a talk, a lot of times people say namaste, which is really the leader or the teacher in me recognizes the God in you. And I always say namaskar, because namaskar means I, having my human experience, recognize you having your human experience. I see you equal, eye to eye, know who you are. So I love the word namaskar. So I'd like to say it to you now and have it say back to me as namaskar. Namaskar.
You have been watching the message from our Sunday celebration service here at Unity on Cape Cod, providing a positive path for spiritual living. Please join us every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. at 147 Walton Ave, Hyannis, Mass. And visit us online at www.unityoncapecod.org.